Well, hello again, and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Rusten. I'm one of the pastors at Cormdale Church, and I'm here with Pastor Jon. What's up, Pastor Jon?
Hey, it's Monday. It's a good day.
It's still Monday.
Yes, it is Monday.
I don't know if you can see outside, but it is sunny where I am, and it is looking like a nice day.
I have the blinds down, but I rode the Harley in, so I was banking on it being a nice day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Augie has a baseball practice today, so it'll be a good day. Good day for baseball practice. The last couple times I've gone, I feel like it's been kind of rainy. So
it's supposed to rain tomorrow, but sunny today.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So we are continuing looking at the commandments, and we are in the fourth commandment, which is all about Sabbath.
Sabbath. Black Sabbath.
So, Black Sabbath. So this is actually one of the few, images is one of the commandments that there's a lot of debate about.
Yeah.
Like, can we make images of Jesus? Like that. Other than that, I think the Sabbath is the only other one that's really heavily debated.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's the one that is debated the most. Like all the questions, like, okay, you have the whole Seventh-day Adventists on one side who think, oh no, we got to keep doing the Sabbath on Saturday. You have Messianic Jews who do the same thing.
Yep.
You have Christians who meet together and worship on the Lord's Day, which has been, which is documented even in the New Testament that when Christians started to meet on the Lord's Day,
early in the morning, on the first day.
Early in the morning, yes, on the first, because of the resurrection, and also because they were being kicked out of synagogues, and so they had to meet somewhere, and they would also, I don't know exactly if you're not meeting on Saturday anymore because you got kicked out of the synagogue, so then you meet on. I don't know why they didn't keep meeting on Saturday, maybe because of the resurrection, right? So they start meeting on the Lord's Day, and you have people who think, okay, so this commandment is completely fulfilled in terms of it's an old covenant ordinance. It's no longer fulfilled, so it's kind of like you can take it or leave it. And you have people who think that that's probably somewhere in between that and the other side, which is like, no, it's still in full force, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the people who think it's like still in full force, and it's been modified based on the resurrection of Christ and stuff. So there's a lot of different takes on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think would be good is to kind of talk through some of the things that maybe don't get talked about with the Sabbath, which you mentioned in the sermon, which is that it's not the command, if you look at it, is not just about resting. It's not just about the Sabbath. It's about the other 6 days too. Mm-hmm. So you spent a lot of time talking about work.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how, how Christians can look at the fourth commandment as, or what they should learn from the fourth commandment in terms of their work?
Yeah. So it's not uncommon to field a question or to talk to somebody who is thinking, I've read Genesis 3 and work is part of the fall, right? So work is inherently a bad thing. It's a necessary evil. It exists because of the rebellion and the fall. And so there's no joy in work. It's just there. And so you can have like a really bad, you can see work as, work as being part of the curse. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at Genesis 3, work doesn't start in Genesis 3. It starts in Genesis 1. And then it's repeated in Genesis 2. And then you have work is now toilsome because of the curse, but work does not exist because of the curse. And so you want to have a good biblical theology of work. And so when you read the command to Sabbath, that model of working 6 days, resting 1 day is a reflection of God's pattern of work in Genesis 1. And the work that God does not exist because of the fall or because of sin. It's a good work. And it's a very practical work. It's a work that orders creation. Work takes things from void and chaos to now we have a functioning ecosystem. We have a garden. We have people. And so it takes chaos and it orders it and it makes life sustainable. That's what God's work is in Genesis. and then we are made in his image, which means we also participate in work that if it's true work, right? And I mean, like a mob boss isn't true work. Okay.
Yeah.
So all true,
or a strip club owner.
Correct. Yeah. All true work mimics God's work, and that it's taking something that is like a raw material or a resource, whether that be information or wood or leather or finances, like it's working it and it's bringing order and it's arranging it. And the whole goal of the outcome of it is always that human life is able to flourish.
Yeah.
And so that is patterned after God's work. And that is that's a holy thing, right? It's a holy thing because it's part of what it means to bear God's image. That's what God did.
Yeah.
That's what we did. And one of the things that we try to, address as much as we can when it's in the text is the importance of work and trying to deconstruct, the dualism that was so, that Luther hated, that was so prevalent in kind of like that the Reformation period, where there was God's work, which was it was the the clergy work, it was the priest, it was giving yourself to some formal vocation in the church, and then the rest of the work just really didn't matter. It wasn't important. And there's that quote that I don't know if Luther said it or not, but he's essentially saying like God loves the carpenter, and he loves the blacksmith, and loves the milkmaid, and all these are
when they're doing their normal blacksmith milkmaid jobs.
Not because they sing a hymn while they do it.
Exactly.
But because God loves to see work, people use their hands. And there's a very we disconnect the secondary means by which God does things. So it's like we know that God is ordering and sustaining the world right now by the word of his power. So he's feeding people. But how does God actually feed people? How does God's power and his sovereignty over all things lead to me drinking the soda right here, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, somebody had to make that. Like somebody had to work a job, and then somebody had to like work the finances for that business, and somebody had to get in a truck and deliver it, and some clerk had to put it on a shelf, right? And those are all the ways that God is feeding a community. Yeah. Right? It's through the baker, it's through the coffee maker, it's through the chef, it's through the truck driver, it's through all of those things. So all of those are vocations, they're ministries, they're callings, and they all serve to sustain a people.
Yep. And you could say that there's another layer to that, which is, so you basically emphasize that we disconnect God's provision from what we're doing. Yeah. And another layer to that is from our own work and our own endeavors, right? The other layer to that is that we sometimes disconnect God's commands to us to love one another from our work and endeavors. So, for instance, when he says, when we're told to like care for the poor, for instance, okay, like I'm thinking about James, care for orphans, widows, and orphans. Mm-hmm. You can't do that unless you have something to care for them with.
Yeah.
Like widows and orphans don't have financial stability, and you can only care for them if you do.
Yeah.
So you can't love. There's lots of ways you can't bear one another's burdens if you are not actually working and have something to give.
Yeah. This week I'm preaching on the don't steal, right?
Yeah. And, it's very related.
Yeah. When Paul talks to the church in Ephesus, he's like, tell the stealer, right, the thief, to stop and to get a job so that he'll have something to share. Right? You haven't stopped stealing until you've started to share. Well, how do you do that? You have to have a job.
Yeah, there's a weird thing that's happened in a lot of like evangelical circles that have been soaking in the kind of like, I wouldn't call it necessarily even the woke stuff, but more like it's like almost like soaking in some of the social gospel stuff from a long time ago, like prioritizing
Mm-hmm.
caring for the poor in such a way that you feel guilty about getting a job or telling the poor to get a job.
Yeah.
Like in the the economy of the Bible, like the the answer to your poverty is to work.
Mm-hmm.
Like the answer to um like that's just all over in the Proverbs, right? And there's just a weird divorcing of those things, so that if you tell someone, hey, don't be idle, work, and be self-sustaining, right? That
Yeah.
weirdly smacks of like, well, you need to make like it's almost like we're trying to create this category of perpetual poor
Mm-hmm.
in our mind. Like we have to like not say something to offend those who are perpetually poor, like as though it's good for them to be perpetually poor and just cared for by other people. But like
Yeah.
in the Bible, it's always like, no. The goal here is to get you to be self-sustaining. The
Right.
goal here is to get you to be a producer and someone who can care for others.
Yeah.
And even the gleaning laws in the Old Testament were not handouts.
Right.
They were part-time jobs.
Yeah, because
They were like,
I was just reading that today. It's like you didn't when you didn't take all the olives, or you didn't pick up the thing that fell on the ground, right? You didn't then go gather those all together and put them in a stand. So you left them.
Yeah.
So somebody could then do the work of gleaning it, right? And part of that is like there's dignity in work.
Yep.
It's funny that when you find out people who get really wealthy, it's like you're like, well, why don't they quit working? Well, because there's something really satisfying about work.
There is.
Like God made us to work.
Yeah.
There's work to do. Doesn't matter how much money you have. There's work in the world to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's an interesting application to this, this Sabbath law with regard to retirement, right?
Yeah, right.
Because there's the command to work 6 days and rest on the seventh assumes a sort of, at least as you are able, I think, an activity in the world that is to God's glory. And it doesn't mean that you're, have to work a 9-to-5 job until you die.
Mm-hmm.
It more means like, don't accept idleness as an option. Like be engaged in the world, be putting your hands to good endeavors.
Yeah.
Build, like, I think it, like in terms of like building the kingdom, like I want to die swinging some form of metaphorical hammer for the kingdom.
Yeah.
Like that's what I think that's true. A true application of this. This commandment. So we would say that we
one more thing on that real quick before you go.
Yeah.
The 6 days, right, of work. Like I think about, there's people who work 410s.
Yeah.
That's very common in our community for the shipyard. It's like, so what, they get 3 weekends? Like, how does that work? And are they in violation because they're only working 4 and 6? And it's like the principle of 6 and 1 is that you're working, and in reality, those days off, like you're still working, right? There's work days. Like my Saturday, I'm usually working a lot, and there's work. The little side business I do, I fixing and repairing, dirt bikes for people, or you're just taking care of the yard and the house and like working on our own stuff. It's like you're working and working, whether or not that's you're punching, the clock at the job that pays you your salary. You're working.
Yep. And so part of this is that we're basically saying that we agree that this commandment is something that continues now, right?
Yes.
Because like we might want to talk more about the applications of it, especially with regard to the day of rest. But I would consider myself a Sabbatarian of sorts. Like even and we could get into that a little bit, but like there are people who take it to a level that I think is not right. But that'd be the next thing to get into. I think that was that your next point. I want to make sure that, because you took us through in the sermon this idea of work, but then you also talked about there's a rest a gift of rest, and then there is a future hope, right?
Yep.
So there's a sense in which so the first thing would be, okay, so there is a sense in which the day of rest, the Sabbath, continues in terms of we have an application of it today. That's the gift of rest. But there's a sense in which there's a future rest we look forward to that is that is to come, and that is in a sense ours now in Christ, but we are waiting its full arrival, I guess is how it's put it, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the whole, so the idea of gift of rest, like the context for the law obviously is the slavery. It's in the background. It's like a couple months, removed. And I think it's important to acknowledge, like, the idea of rest was not, you're not going to find that in the ancient world. Like this command that you are to rest.
Especially not spoken to slaves.
No, for sure not spoken to slaves. So, people talk about cultural appropriation. And I think if there was like an atheist that wanted to be consistent in their rejection of cultural appropriation, that they should work all the time, because rest is a gift, and the idea of a culture that honors rest on a regular, that's something that God gives. So if you want to reject God, you got to reject that too. Anyways,
for sure.
But most people don't want to reject that.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that's interesting, is like the application of this command is just to receive kindness from God.
Yeah.
and to not be anxious. Right. So you talked a little bit about, like, I think you did talk a lot about that slave master dynamic. What do you think are applications of the command to rest today that Christians should take seriously?
Okay, so I think that the strict Sabbatarian misses the point. So if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, you're still honoring the
seventh day. Yeah,
it's the seventh day. You don't do anything.
Yeah,
I think at the heart, like, if go back to Sinai, go back to Israel, leading up to that. Remember when God gives the manna?
Yes,
and there's a training in that. Like, you have to trust God for daily provision, and then on this one day you're going to get enough for two, but you have to trust that God's going to provide that, right?
Yeah.
So the resting is a gift, and it's also a test, right? Because you're living day to day. You're living day to day, and to you basically exclude yourself from 15% of your earning potential in an agrarian farming. Like, that's hard.
It's like a tithe of time.
Yes. And you can only actually rest if you trust that God will provide. Right? Yep. So the only way you rest is by faith.
Yep.
That's the rest that we're commanded, to trust in God who provides all things. Okay. So so now you're asking, okay, what's the application for us today?
And one of the things I think that I'm curious your like, I look at Leviticus as a bit of an unpacking of a lot of the Ten Commandments, right? You see, like, okay, you have this, like, the header in the Ten Commandments, and then you see applications. And one of the things that I like, if you go to where the instruction on the Sabbath is, that's where you get the first instruction in the Bible on public worship. You have a day where every Sabbath day is a feast to the Lord, where God's people get together for a holy convocation. Yeah. And I had to go and look up the word convocation. I was like, what? That sounds like, what does that mean exactly? Well, convocation is large gathering. So it's a large gathering in holiness together to what? To worship and feast together. Yeah. So you get the and I think an application of this is the fact that we worship once a week. Yeah. Like, we worship once a week as God's people. We gather on
1 and 7.
Yes, on 1 and 7. I mean, and I think there's significance behind gathering on the first day of the week because as Christians, because I think that the old covenant Sabbath was based on creation, and the new covenant Sabbath is based on new creation.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to think like you can do this in a cheap way that says, oh yeah, we shouldn't murder. Everybody knows we shouldn't murder. You shouldn't commit adultery. Yeah, everybody knows you shouldn't commit adultery. And then you get to this commandment. It's like, well, what do you do with this commandment? I was like, well, that doesn't work in the new covenant. I'm like, well, you better figure out why it doesn't, if it doesn't. Like, what's the governing principle for interpreting how this works? And where the way that I wrap my head around it is that the commandment to rest stands.
Yes.
But the way that it is worked out or applied changes because the world has changed.
Yeah.
Right. We're living in a different world. And I just mean like, oh, culturally, I don't mean like, oh, that's ancient and we're modern. I mean that with the life, death, resurrection, ascension of Christ, we're the
cosmos have changed. Yeah.
Yes. We're actually in the new creation.
Yeah.
And the only thing that could change that, the way that is observed would be, it'd have to be a different world. Or you could think of it this way. We're in a different week. If you want to use like the structure of 7, the Sabbath always
the first week was the week of Adam.
The first week is the week of Adam, and it ends in rest. But the second week is the week of Christ that begins with resurrection rest.
Yeah.
And so we are Sabbathing by gathering we're in a new creation week, right? Yeah. Something new has happened. Yeah. And so we are gathering, we're resting in the work of Christ. We're resting in his grace, in his provision. We're worshiping, we're celebrating, we're doing all of that. To me, that's the minimal application of it.
Yeah.
And then there's all sorts of things on top of it that honestly, like I've been thinking about a lot personally, and I haven't necessarily landed with like hard convictions.
Sure.
But like, I don't want to do any work on Sunday. Like I washed my car yesterday. And like it was so dirty, and I've been not washing it on Sundays on purpose. I'm like, if this day is holy unto the Lord and it's supposed to be a day of rest, then it should look different than the rest of the days.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that difference should go beyond, okay, we go to church on Sunday morning and we worship and we have communion. Like, and there's stuff that our family does. Like we have every Sunday night, we have the same like meal. We're all there for it. We rest together, but there's that in between time where I'm like, my conduct should look different. You know, if I do all the same things on Sunday afternoon that I did on Saturday afternoon, I'm not sure that's fully getting what the Sabbath is about. So I haven't landed the plane yet, but that's what I'm working through.
I'm with you on that. I'm a very similar. I have very similar inner working out, like there's a working out of it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that what we're both saying is that there is something that there's something that God is encouraging, right, with the Sabbath that we're missing if we don't like embrace it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that I want my, like for instance, like think about this in terms of kids. I'm like, I want my kids to grow up thinking Sunday is the grandest day.
Yeah,
like it was the day where we just like. We worship God in the morning. We kicked off our feet. It's the day we have movie nights, like fun nights. Yep, it's the day we have, the special food comes out.
Yeah.
Because we're saying this day, we especially mark once a week that our God came out of the grave. He saved us from sin, and this is like we're living the first day of this week in light of that, and we're gonna come back again next week and remember it. It's like that's what I think. That's the heart of the Sabbath. Like the Sabbath is, it's made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Yeah. Like I want that, and so, and I think that's the hardest thing for people to wrestle with, I think, is the change between old covenant, new covenant, between, seventh day, first day. Once you kind of have some of the paradigms in your mind, it makes so much sense that the church changed to meeting on the first day of the week. Mm-hmm. Because, if you look at the Old Testament, you think the seventh day is his day of rest. Well, it's also his day of enthronement,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then similarly, the resurrection day, celebrates that he's king. He's come up out of all the those who accused him and killed him as king. And he's like, no, he actually proved he was the king, and he's been vindicated. And so there's these, and then it's old creation, new creation. There's just, once you kind of wrap your head around that, like, okay, so there's something that's continues, but it's also changed. And the way it's changed is kind of like that elementary principle thing we've talked about in the past. And you mentioned this a little bit as well in your sermon, this idea that there's a repetition in the Old Testament of certain things like sacrifices that were pointing to a fulfillment to come, right? And similarly, I think that the Sabbath, at least the way the Sabbath was executed in the Old Testament, in a lot of ways, I think was, like you said, training for kids. It was like teaching kids how to, make God priority, right? It was, you were, when the kid and the slave in the house are they seem like they're on the same level.
Yeah.
But the true kid, when he gets older, he doesn't need to live under the guardian anymore, which is like the old covenant way of executing things is like guardian, right?
Yep.
So I think this is one of those areas I like James Jordan. He's like, as Christians, we are the mature men. Like we're like, in terms of history, we're mature. So which means we have, like, God has given us this to figure out.
Yeah. And that's the thing that like hit me when I was preaching through it, is like, you have to be wise. Yes. You have to think through this. Like, it's not just a simple, okay, do this, do this, do this. It's like,
exactly, you
got to think through these things. Like one of the things I wrote in my notes that I wasn't able to get to in the sermon is like, the day that as Christians we gather to worship is the 8th day. It's the first day of a new week. It's the day in which the sign of circumcision was applied, the cutting of flesh, which points forward to the Savior, right? That's the day that we meet. Well, why do we meet on that day? Well, because Christ has fulfilled all of those things. Like, he is that day. And so the world has changed, right?
Yeah.
You have fulfillment. So there's all sorts of like symbolic things happening on that line up with the 7th day or the first day of the new week based on the old calendar.
Totally. I love that, man. I don't feel like we've talked about the significance of the circumcision on the 8th day, and maybe we have, but that's kind of mind blowing, because that day marked for that infant a new order, like world order, placed upon him.
And if you like, I don't want to like get too James Jordan here, but I mean, that's not a bad thing. But it's like, you had 6 days of work, right? Then you had 1 day of rest. Then you have circumcision. That's your 8 days, right? And
interesting.
It's like, and well, the day of circumcision is the first day of the new week. It's the day of worship. It's the Lord's day.
Yes.
It's the day of resurrection.
It's the start of the new life in that covenant. Yeah. Or sacramentally old. It's funny that nobody ever refers to Old Testament ordinances as sacraments, but they were the Old Testament sacraments.
Yeah, for sure.
So, well, I think that the an application of this command really is there's a couple, one or two other things I think we should just barely touch on. One is that when you think about the morality of this command, like, this is the moral, like the 10 commandments are been often seen as like the moral law, right? One of the things that's often emphasized is like, okay, so if you're a business owner, if you are you should make sure your people are getting rest, right?
Yeah.
There's an application of like, be like the Lord who gave his people rest. And that's, if you look at like Calvin or people who like worked through this, that's one of the things they often emphasize is like, this is like, he in the congregation, he'd look up at the business owners or the feudal lords, right? And like, that means you better give your subjects rest, right?
Yeah.
And it's and so that's one thing that, like, you just always good to pick out these little gems of why God's law is good, and that's one of them.
Well, I think one like application thing, because we both have said this. I don't think we've talked about this before, but like, in our household, we try to make Sunday special, different,
yes.
right? And you and I both do the same thing, though. I've never heard you say it before, or maybe you have. I just didn't notice, but like we do a special meal every Sunday night. We have a huge charcuterie spread, and it's every Sunday. Everybody knows it's coming. It's the favorite meal the whole week, and we're all together as a family.
We don't do that. I want to do something like that. Like we try to have some special food and like fun time, and a lot of times it ends up being like oftentimes there's just parties at people's houses, like Brenna's parents' house, but like it's always a special day. Something special's happening.
Yeah, and your kids are younger than mine, so it's harder to do that kind of stuff. But it was like every Sunday we know this is what we're doing. The family's home together because I've got all the kids are driving now, and we do our charcuterie and we watch a movie. And it's like, okay, so we're making this is a family rest time. It's a family feast time. Yeah. So if you're listening and you're thinking, "Hi, what can I do?" Like, find little things you can do to make Sunday a unique time of rest and special for the family. Yeah. Like, just do one little thing, and then you can add on to that. But you can take small steps.
And you can even like build anticipation for it on Saturday. Like, tomorrow's Sunday, we get to worship the Lord, and then go have whatever the feast thing you're going to do, or whatever the fun thing you're going to do as a family. I think that's
pizza, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. If it's pizza Sunday, as you have kids, you'll find the language that says, "Oh, this is feast day," and it usually is way simpler than what you might think is a feast day. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. Well, what a great thing to think about. Thanks for listening, everybody, to Sermon B-Sides. Until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. See ya.
See ya.